All right. Well, hi there, folks. Thanks for joining us for our ecumenical, as yet unnamed podcast. My name is Tim. It's great to have you here with us. I'm Tim from Young United Church in Winnipeg, and I'm joined by Gwen from St. Matthew's Anglican Church, and Tyler from Gloria Dei Lutheran Church. And it's great to be here together. And so today was my turn to pick the topic, and so I was thinking about this, and while I was thinking about it, I was getting just overwhelmed by everything, by whether it's the election in the U.S. or constantly shifting COVID restrictions, which we're in Winnipeg, so we're at a time when they're getting more stringent, and just so much of the world, work-life balance, all that's shifting, and we're all trying to grapple with it. And I realized, as I was, just adding this in the back of my brain, I realized I don't know where I'm getting my energy from these days. I don't have a way that grounds me. Before COVID-19 hit, yeah, I had, my faith community, my spiritual practices, as part of a mainline Protestant denomination. We have our specific practices that we do, which, I mean, we may not even recognize them as practices, but they're life-giving in and of themselves. And without that, with all this shift, with all this change, I'm finding myself pretty worn down. And so I thought, well, I wonder what Tyler and Gwen are doing for spiritual practices, how that's shifted, what practices were part of their communities before this happened, and how those have continued, and how they've shifted, and what spiritual practice looks like in the age of COVID-19. So with that, I'm gonna put it out to you two and ask, what does spiritual practice look like for you two in the age of COVID-19?
I would say for the community where I serve, to speak about the community's experience, there was a lot of anxiety in March when all of this went down. I would say I'll just give you a date and then back up from that just to set the stage a little bit. It was March 17th when we made the decision to suspend worship services. And it was on March 8th that we sort of realized this is something that's hitting home close to us that may actually affect our community life. And by then we had things like hand sanitizer, and we had gone to elbow bumps for sharing the peace and that kind of thing. But it was still a very much in-person physical thing. It always had been. And I'm relatively new to the community. I just began serving in December, and certainly in March. It was just a few months into my call there. And so the thought of going online was really not in anybody's mind. But on March 15th, I guess it was the Sunday morning, we were talking, we're going to be clamping down on physical touch. We're going to be using more sanitizer, and we're going to be taking special care in the preparation of communion trays and those kinds of things. But we foresaw continuing services. We started to think about what we would do for a couple of weeks if we needed to actually stay home for a couple of weeks. We certainly didn't expect it to be a longer term thing. And in terms of maybe sending home a physical bulletin or some in print kind of devotional material and that kind of thing. But when we got the directive from the Prime Minister, it was on CBC and all the news networks, stay home. That was on Monday, March 16th, as I recall it. And then after some conversation with my council chair, we made the decision as a congregation to suspend worship services on the 17th. In the days afterwards, leading up to the following Sunday, we kind of had to jump online. The congregation I served didn't have a website before. We had used Facebook just a little bit, and Zoom was certainly a foreign thing altogether in terms of trying to do some kind of in-person gathering. But within a matter of days, really, we did that. We prepared a video that we uploaded to YouTube because I had some comfort level and some experience doing some of that, and then connected via Zoom. Now, I would say that in the first few weeks of doing this, it didn't feel real. It didn't feel like something, it felt like a tie over. It was something we were just kind of doing, figuring that we'd get back into physical safe space soon enough. And I think the spiritual practice side of things, the pattern that we've sort of moved into, that is that gives some grounding and some comfort to our community, has developed, and that probably even developed more as we got, I don't know when the threshold was, but probably sometime in late May, June, when we were sort of like, this is the long haul. That people started sort of going, yeah, I can do Zoom. I'll tune in for a virtual coffee hour midweek every week. I'll tune in for a Bible study on Sunday, and then I know to go to YouTube for our virtual online worship service kind of thing. So that's largely been the spiritual practice of the community through this time. I think there's been individual pieces as well that I've heard people speak about and that I've taken on myself, but I'll let somebody else talk for a bit about your experiences.
Well, I've seen what both of you have had online and appreciated a lot. And what we did was a lot, lower level DIY. But one of the main central practices or spiritual practices for Anglicans, or most Anglicans, is the communion, which can only really be done together. And we had a few Zoom communions in the summer, but not having communion has led me to actually being more interested again in more diverse solitary spiritual practices than I have been in a while, because my world is like leading spiritual practice, right? So I haven't spent as much time on spiritual practices outside of centering prayer, which is a meditation, for a long time. But I found myself, especially by this fall, really getting kind of yearning again for more structured solitary practices. And so one of the things I've been doing is listening to Teze songs, just having them on, and they're short, repetitive, but contemplative songs. Teze and Teze type songs, because there's Teze songs that are actually from Teze in France, but that kind of repetitive but mantra-like worship has been helpful for me at home. And I also really got into prayer beads again. I really like them because there's a way to go into it, and then there's a way to frame different parts of it, and then there's a way to come out of it again, which is the same way you went in. And so it sort of holds things for me in a way that just praying without structure doesn't do. And part of the reason I've come to appreciate that is because of all the negative news, how depressing things can be, how distressed a lot of people around me are. And well, I preached on this last Sunday, but it was really quite experimental for me, because I was thinking about holding the truth, the hard truth, right? Because denial is just going to be worse for us, right? We need to face the hard truths about our world, about our society, about where things are at, about the fact that, 2021 might not be any better than 2020, right? We need to be able to hold these things, but if we hold them without any sort of framing, they can burn us. And so I was thinking of it like oven mitts, or like the sandwich with the bread, and like the beads, where you have these frames that hold the pieces. You're maybe praying for 7 people, but and you're worried about them, or 7 things you're worried about, but you have these things framing them on both sides to help hold it. And so I've been thinking a lot about that in terms of media consumption and making a sandwich of it. So you've got these hard truths, but in a sandwich, you always have more bread than filling, right? So the bread you want to have the bread of positive things, good things in your life. So praying with beads is a practice for framing things, but in my life media consumption, I'm trying to make it a practice now to hold it with consuming something positive and local and personal, or hopeful, or beautiful, or something like that, on both sides of dealing with the ugliness of what we're getting in some of the media. So that's been a big spiritual practice for me right now.
I like that idea of that spiritual practice helps sort of frame the rest of the world. Would that be a fair way of me saying?
Mm-hmm. It gives shape.
It gives shape to it and frames it. And I like that oven mitt analogy. I mean, something that comes back to me as you say that is this sense of you don't know what you've got till it's gone. So without, I mean, we've been in this situation for, we're in the 8th month, which is kind of hard to believe, the 8th month of this. And it's like, what are those things that I do miss, which maybe I didn't even recognize as helping me frame the world or giving me that grounding with which to look at the world until they're gone. You said Taizé. I know music is a huge part of Young United Church, and I'm not a big music guy, but yeah, what is it when that music, that practice of singing together, which I think is a real spiritual practice, again, not often held up as much, but what happens to us when that's gone? How do we? That's why I like that image. It's like we're grabbing the hot stuff out of the oven without gloves on, because, we don't have that, whatever it is to frame it all in. Yeah. So what practices then would you be missing? I'm hearing what you've got now. What ones are you missing from before? Or has what you're doing now, has that translated well for you?
Well, I mentioned communion earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I know that a lot of my people, there's some people who come to church are more there for the sermon. There's some who come are there more there for the community, and some are really there for the communion. And those folks, also a lot of our folks that are really there for the communion also don't have internet. And so I know they're missing it. And I am too, because it's that chance to every week to sort of reevaluate and recommit to what matters in life, to reopen. So that's a big one for me. But yeah, gathering together and singing, I think, is huge. Mm-hmm. How about you, Tyler?
Yeah, I was going to say communion. That's definitely the biggest. We've tried to meet that sort of communal need with online Eucharist. It's not the same. The way I've spoken about it with my people and the way they've also responded to our conversation about it, we've said we're not going to do it as a video. So we'll do it as a Zoom thing where there's some live, real-time, face-to-face interaction. But I'm aware of other congregations that do it as a video kind of thing, and so I know that there's communities out there trying to meet that need, but it's not the same. And I'm not sure. I think there's also a little bit of sort of predicted grief that's in all of this too. What's it going to be like when we do go back? Like we can do communion in a safe way with crackers and juice in my home on the coffee table in my living room or something. But will we be able to use a loaf of bread like ever again? I hope so, but it may be a while. Will we be able to have a common cup? I mean, even in March, we were moving away from that. And that's central to what we believe about the practice of that sacrament. And
so now I want to kind of probe a little bit about your theologies of communion. And I ask this because, I would suggest of the three of us, our three denominations, the United Church would have the maybe not theologically the lowest view of communion, but probably practically, I would suspect our attendees would have a less high view of communion. You know, I've been a part of congregations where it's not, oh, how often do we get to have communion, so much as, well, what's the minimum we have to have communion? And so, you know, the United Church, I might get corrected on this, it has a minimum. You have to have it 4 times a year. And this isn't for everyone. I don't want to paint everyone in the United Church with the same brush or anything like that. But it isn't held as high as I think it is in the Lutheran Church and the Anglican Church. And so what I noticed for myself, we did it by Zoom for the first time, first Sunday of October, and it meant a lot to me. And I was kind of surprised by that, because often it doesn't mean that much to me. Maybe it's because my head is in another place and I'm worried about it all happening, but I've never had that high of a view of communion. And so I'm curious, because both of you have held that up as something that you miss. So I'm asking you to kind of stretch that out a little bit more for my sake.
Before I was Anglican, I didn't really, well, actually, that's not true. Before I started celebrating with taking communion, maybe is more appropriate to say, with Lutherans on a campus, I didn't really get a lot out of communion. To be honest, it just felt weird. It felt like this weird thing that we should do. And I think that's the thing about practices, is that when you do them all the time, then whether or not those certain things are supposed to come with the practice, your spirit can find things in the practice. So I think that that's happened for me with communion. And so for me, coming out of an evangelical background, I have kind of an altar call theology of communion, that every week we go, you know, we choose again, we decide again. Am I going to keep opening up more? Am I going to close down more? Am I going to open to receiving and giving as Christ did and does for us? Or am I going to be too busy for that, right? So it's kind of that chance again and again to do that. I think a lot of Anglicans don't see it really or wouldn't frame it that way, wouldn't talk about it that way. But for me, that's what it is. Yeah.
In terms of our church's practice, I'm aware of quite a few Lutherans who are doing some form of online Eucharist. So it's a permitted thing to do. In terms of our theology, each pastor is essentially a bishop in their local context. So we're not needing to get the permission of sort of our church hierarchy that way. So we did it as something to, first we asked the question, and in Gloria Dei, we asked the question, is this something people would want? And I will say that early in the time of the pandemic, like it would have been, I said March 17th, that we decided to suspend services. Well, Easter rolled around within that first month, April 12th or whatever it was. And so part of Holy Week and the lead up to Easter is Maundy Thursday. And that's the story of the Last Supper. That's sort of the origins of this sacrament, at least as far as the story goes. And so I asked our worship committee to start, and then just a few people who had been on our Zoom meetings, would you like something? Do you want to try an agape meal? So that's what we did on Maundy Thursday. And then beyond that, we had a little bit more conversation as the weeks went on. And by the beginning of May, we sort of instituted on the first Sunday of the month, we'll have online Eucharist.
I mean, for me, this past little while is just been gosh, I'd really like to be doing it every week now. Like there's this sort of growing desire in its absence for something I didn't even realize I missed. Like a longing for that. And I don't know what it is about it. I'm not sure what it is. I'll have to do some sitting with that, because I mean, when you think about communion, it's pretty weird, right? I mean, it's a really weird thing. And for anyone on the outside of the church looking in, it's like, okay, yeah, like I mean, that's what that was one of the charges against the church in the early church, was like they're cannibals, right? They eat bodies. Like, that's not good. And yeah, like, no, no, and so that was an early charge used against the church, and I kind of get that charge, like, but it being absent has reminded me that there's something in there, and I don't know what it is. And maybe that's it. Maybe it's just this, dipping your toe in mystery, and that's enough. If you don't have a high theology of it, maybe it's just, okay, dip your toe in this mystery and just be in contact with whatever this mystery is. And, and then when it's done, and you pull your foot back out and you do it again next week. And then you do it again the next week. And that's just what it is. It's your little access to mystery.
I would say for me, in addition to that, like, it's also a tangible reminder that we are all the same. I mean, in the Lutheran tradition, we have baptism and communion as our two sacraments. And we all come into the world the same way. We all exit the world in the same way. And it's the same coming to the table. It doesn't matter if you're a billionaire or if you're struggling on the streets. Everybody comes to the table. Everybody receives from the same loaf. Everyone receives from the same cup. And so that becomes part of the image that I hold dearly in the sacraments as well. So that's part of, I miss that. It becomes that constant reminder. If we're doing it weekly, for the people that are there, it becomes a constant invitation for those who might be new to the community, that we're just not able to offer the same way in this time.
I wonder if there's something about that community sense of it, I think, is a big part of it. There's this sense of, there's these mundane things of wheat and water, or wheat and wine, which are pretty earthly, and that's what makes up all our bodies. And there's something holy about that, hey? Humbling and holy. Yeah. Yeah. It's very, very incarnational. Is that what you said, Gwen? Incarnational?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah. I think you're right, Gwen.
My sense, when we're doing faith community well, we're doing it as sort of an alternative to society around us. I would say I'm not a super disciplined spiritual practices kind of person. I don't like get up at 5 a.m. and read scripture or pray or those kinds of things. But it matters to me to journey with others. And it matters to me to do things like eating together, whether it's through the ritual of communion or potluck meals. It matters to me to share stories together, whether it's our own sort of personal journey or the ancestors of the faith. It matters to me to sing together. And those are things that we don't really do in other days of the week and regular sort of social interactions in society. And so those become sort of integral pieces to me in journeying with a faith community. And I'm not saying it's just Lutheran. I'm not saying it's just our denominations or just Christianity. I think that's faith community. And I think there's different ways in which our Muslim neighbors have eaten ritually together, as well as had feasts together, and have shared stories and sung songs and those kinds of things as well. And so those are pieces that it's hard to do when you're not in physical contact. And so, yeah, I mean, in this time, that's been a challenge, I think.
Well, it's one of those things that practices untethered from community are a little bit, I don't know, that rubs me the wrong way sometimes. Where it's like, oh, I'll just do this from that group and this from that group and this from that group and this from that group. And that's what I need. When it's untethered from community, when it's untethered from, and even if that community isn't a big one now, but the community stretches back 1,000, 2,000 years, right? I mean, that's, when we talk about being together and taking communion together, I guess we're participating in this, not just with the people around us in physical space, but in temporal space too, or temporal space. And well, it's kind of turned into a conversation around communion, and that's okay. That opens up, I guess, future chats about scripture reading and.
Well, another piece in terms of spiritual practices, or at least the journey of faith community in this time, that I've found obviously difficult, but layers of difficulty is death. In the time that I've been at Gloria Dei, we've had about 6 people have died, and I mean, and so most of that time has been during this isolation time. I think 4 or 5 of them have been since March, and so what do you do when you can't have gatherings of more than 10 people, or right now it's like 5 people? What do you do when you can't be inside together? What do you do if you have to wear a mask whenever you're with any sort of number of people? Like, all those things start to pull away at the celebration of life that family want. It starts to make the grieving process that much more difficult. And I think we can do what we can to work with the images and the sounds and the music, but it's still difficult not doing it in person.
Yeah. I mean, that's a time when it really matters that a large community gather together. That it really matters for people to be present, because that's their chance to be part of that grieving process and part of that reaffirming community and relationship process. The grieving part, I think, is something I've also been thinking about with spiritual practice at this time, that, we can't grieve together as much. We can't do the lament together as much. And so we're doing it alone, or, with whomever we can talk to. And I know some people have been using the Psalms of Lament. I've never figured out what I'm missing yet in the Psalms, because I know a lot of people find the Psalms really important, and people who have been mentors to me have practiced reading a Psalm every day and sitting with it. And I haven't gotten that yet, but I'm kind of thinking now, maybe I should go look into the Psalms of Lament, the Psalms of just expressing and expressing held by God, that things suck, and that there's something helpful about doing that. That I'm thinking about encouraging, maybe in a newsletter or something, encouraging members of our church family to take some time and do that if they feel like that's something that might help, because we're not getting the other practices that we're used to, the other rituals.
I think I'm going to hold it there, because I think that's a good note to leave hanging on a little bit, and just let that process our hearts a little bit, let it do its work. That sense of grief and practice and being alone, and what does community look like? Because I think a lot of people are there. So let's wrap up with a blessing. Does that work for you? As we carry this time with us, this age of COVID, this age of partisanship, this age of sorrow, this age of grief, may you go into the world, whatever that looks like, with a community around you, a community of love and care, perhaps not physically close, but a community that stretches back thousands of years. May you go into the world embraced by the presence of the Spirit that guides you forward. Amen.